Before we dive in, viewer discretion is advised. This content is for entertainment purposes.
What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected leading men collides with one of television's most outspoken icons on live daytime TV? The answer is chaos, raw emotion, and a moment so shocking it left both the audience in the studio and millions online absolutely stunned. Because what you're about to hear will have you choosing sides, and your voice matters in this story. The stage was set on a crisp Tuesday morning. The view's set shimmered under bright studio lights, the table gleaming, the mugs neatly placed, the cameras rolling with flawless precision. The audience, buzzing with excitement, knew that this wasn't just another episode. George Clooney, Hollywood royalty, beloved activist, and the very definition of suave, was walking into the lion's den. He had been invited to promote his latest project, but even insiders whispered that tension was brewing beneath the polished smiles. From the moment George walked onto the stage, the atmosphere shifted. Applause thundered through the audience, women in the crowd waving, some even standing to catch a better glimpse. Clooney, with his signature grin and perfectly tailored suit, gave a modest wave. He looked comfortable, too comfortable, almost as if he believed his charm could melt through anything, almost as if he underestimated what was about to unfold. Whoopi Goldberg, seated at the center of the table, leaned back in her chair with a knowing smirk. Her eyes followed him, measuring, weighing, almost daring him to cross a line. The other co-hosts clapped politely, but Joy Behar whispered something under her breath that caused Sunny Hostin to stifle a laugh. Ana Navarro gave a polite smile, but even she seemed cautious, as though anticipating sparks. As George took his seat, Whoopi leaned forward with that husky laugh she was famous for. Well, well, well. Look who decided to grace us with his presence. Mr. Hollywood himself. George chuckled, resting his hands on the table. Always a pleasure, Whoopi. You know I can't resist when you call. It sounded smooth, playful, but the undercurrent was sharp, and Whoopi caught it immediately. The crowd laughed, though nervously, sensing the tone shift. The first few minutes played out harmless enough, banter about his new film, his humanitarian work, his charm effortlessly disarming most of the panel. But when Sunny Hostin brought up politics, the air tightened. George had never shied away from speaking his mind on global issues, but today was different. Today, Whoopi was ready to challenge him in a way few ever dared. So George, Sunny asked, adjusting her glasses, you've always been vocal about corruption and leadership. Do you think Hollywood itself is guilty of ignoring its own problems while preaching to everyone else? George leaned back, his jaw tightening slightly. I think Hollywood's no different than any other institution. We have flaws, yes, but we also have people fighting to make things better. That's the point, isn't it? To use whatever platform you have for good. It was diplomatic, almost rehearsed. But before he could continue, Whoopi cut in. Come on, George. Don't give us the press tour version. You've been in this business long enough. Hollywood doesn't just have flaws, it's built on hypocrisy. And you've played the game as well as anyone. Don't you think it's a little rich to sit here and act like you're above it? The audience gasped. The sound was sharp, like a collective intake of breath. Joy Behar raised her eyebrows, Sunny froze, and Ana Navarro shifted in her seat uncomfortably. George's smile faltered. He looked directly at Whoopi now, his eyes narrowing, his charm stripped away. I've never claimed to be above anything, Whoopi. But don't you think it's a little ironic to hear that from you? The words hung in the air like a blade. The audience murmured, tension spiraling higher. Whoopi's smirk disappeared, her face hardening. She leaned forward, her voice low and deliberate. What exactly are you trying to say, George? The audience went silent, the kind of silence that's louder than sound itself. Everyone knew something explosive was coming. George's voice was calm, almost too calm. I'm saying that you've been part of this same system for decades. You've defended it when it suited you, criticized it when it didn't. Maybe the hypocrisy doesn't just belong to Hollywood. Maybe it belongs to all of us sitting at this table. Gasps erupted again, louder this time. The studio audience shifted restlessly, eyes darting between Clooney and Goldberg like they were courtside at the most dangerous game in town. Joy whispered something to Sunny, who shook her head slowly, unwilling to intervene just yet. Whoopi's fingers drummed on the table, her famous poker face now cracking with flashes of real anger. Her tone sharpened. You're really going to come on my show, George, and throw that at me? You think because you've got a pretty face and a couple Oscars, you can sit here and judge me? George didn't flinch. His reply was quick, precise, cutting. No, Whoopi. I think because I've seen the same hypocrisy up close, I have the right to call it out. And if you can't handle someone pointing out the truth, maybe you shouldn't be sitting here throwing stones. The audience erupted into chaos. Cheers, boos, claps, shouts. Some were stunned into silence. Others leaned forward as if they couldn't believe what they were witnessing. The camera operators zoomed in, capturing every flicker of fury on Whoopi's face, every ounce of restrained defiance in Clooney's gaze. Joy finally tried to cut the tension with a nervous laugh. Okay, let's not start World War III here. But it was too late. The battle lines had been drawn. And everyone in that studio knew it was only the beginning. The cameras kept rolling, the audience held their breath, and the clash between George Clooney and Whoopi Goldberg was only just igniting. The air in the studio was no longer electric. It was combustible. The audience sat perched at the edge of their seats, eyes darting between George Clooney and Whoopi Goldberg, as though they were witnessing the opening blows of a heavyweight match. The applause signs flickered but were drowned out by murmurs, gasps, and the occasional shouted word from the crowd. Nothing about this felt like daytime television anymore. This felt like war. George shifted in his seat, his posture relaxed on the surface, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. He'd been through countless interviews, endured tough questions from politicians, reporters, activists. But this was different. This wasn't a conversation. It was a showdown. Whoopi's voice sliced through the tension. You know what your problem is, George? You waltz in here thinking everyone should just clap and nod because you've been successful. But you don't want to admit that maybe you're part of the machine you claim to despise. You've benefited from it more than anyone. George let out a soft laugh, but it wasn't warm. It was hollow, edged with irritation. And what about you, Whoopi? You've sat in that chair for years, telling the world what's right and wrong. You've called out hypocrisy, corruption, lies. But when it's one of your friends, when it's one of your allies, suddenly the rules bend. Isn't that the same thing you're accusing me of? The audience gasped again, louder this time. A few claps erupted in support, quickly silenced by a chorus of disapproval. Whoopi leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. She wasn't laughing now. You think you know me, George? You don't. You see what the cameras show you, but you don't know the weight I carry every time I sit here. You don't know the responsibility that comes with it. You can walk away from this business anytime you want. Me. I've been fighting tooth and nail to keep my seat at the table. And don't you dare sit there and act like you're the only one with a conscience. The room buzzed with energy. Joy Behar tried to intervene, raising her hands. All right, can we just dial it down a notch? George, Whoopi, let's keep it friendly. This isn't. But Whoopi cut her off, her voice thunderous. No, Joy. This needs to be said. Because people like George love to come in here, give a speech, and leave like they've solved the world's problems. Meanwhile, some of us are living with the consequences every single day. George's jaw clenched, and his voice hardened. I've been in refugee camps, Whoopi. I've stood with victims of war crimes, raised money, put myself on the line. Don't tell me I don't live with consequences. I've seen things most people in Hollywood couldn't stomach for a single day. Don't you dare question my commitment to the truth. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the crew behind the cameras froze, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let the fire burn. Sunny Hostin, her voice tentative, finally tried to interject. George, Whoopi, I think you're both speaking from a place of passion, but maybe we should. Whoopi snapped her gaze at Sunny, silencing her with just a look. George took the moment to lean in, his tone calm but piercing. You say I don't know you, Whoopi. Maybe you're right. But I know enough to see when someone hides behind their role instead of owning up to their part in the system. You've been here long enough to know better. So why keep pretending? The audience broke into chaos, some cheering, some booing, some shouting, let him speak, while others yelled, respect Whoopi. The divide was clear. This wasn't just a debate, it was a cultural earthquake splitting the room in half. Whoopi slammed her hand against the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Pretending? George, I've lived this life out loud. Every mistake, every choice, every fight. I've never hidden who I am. But you show up when it's convenient, make the headlines, then retreat back into your mansion. Don't lecture me on authenticity. George's expression shifted, a flash of anger breaking through his controlled demeanor. You think authenticity is about staying angry on television? About yelling louder than everyone else? No. Authenticity is about doing the work when no one's watching. And maybe that's why I don't need a camera to validate what I do. The tension hit a breaking point. Audience members began shouting over each other, their voices clashing like a stadium crowd. Some applauded George's words, while others booed him mercilessly. The co-hosts looked rattled, their usual composure slipping. Ana Navarro whispered urgently to a producer off camera, clearly begging for a commercial break. But the director held off. The ratings gold unfolding on live television was too valuable to cut away from. Whoopi's voice dropped to a low, steady tone, each word deliberate. "You're not going to come on my show, George, and paint me as the hypocrite. Not in front of my audience. Not on my watch." George leaned in closer, his voice equally steady, equally dangerous. "Maybe the truth doesn't care whose show it is." The crowd erupted, the noise overwhelming, the tension spilling over into something primal. Some people cheered wildly, others booed with equal force. The camera panned to faces in the audience, mouths open, hands over hearts, disbelief etched across their expressions. At that moment, it wasn't just George Clooney versus Whoopi Goldberg. It was Hollywood versus television, privilege versus grit, charm versus fire. And the outcome was still uncertain. The producers frantically debated in the control room whether to cut, but before they could decide, George leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly, while Whoopi stared him down, unblinking, unrelenting. And as the cameras rolled on, the battle lines deepened. This wasn't ending soon. It was only escalating. The studio no longer felt like a talk show set. It felt like a courtroom, a battlefield, and a stage all at once. The table where the co-hosts sat had become an invisible line, splitting George Clooney and Whoopi Goldberg into opposing camps. The audience's energy had gone beyond curiosity. What once was applause and gasps had grown into something feverish, a living roar that rose and fell with every exchange. George leaned back, his hands folded in front of him, trying to project calm, but his eyes betrayed him. They were sharp, unblinking, and filled with the kind of simmering frustration he rarely allowed anyone to see. Whoopi, meanwhile, leaned forward, her body heavy against the table, her voice deep, steady, deliberate. Her presence consumed the room, commanding not just attention but submission. The cameras zoomed in, catching every twitch, every flicker of emotion, every pause between words. The viewers at home, millions of them, were glued to their screens, feeling as if they were watching something far more dangerous than television. Whoopi's voice rang out again, low but laced with venom. "You think you can sit here and play the role of some moral compass, George. But let's be honest, you're still Hollywood's golden boy. You've gotten away with things most people in this industry never could. Don't talk to me about truth. Don't talk to me about sacrifice." George tilted his head, the corners of his lips twitching into something between a smirk and a grimace. "And what about you, Whoopi? You've built a career out of speaking your truth, right? But what happens when your truth doesn't line up with the facts? You've defended people who didn't deserve defending. You've turned a blind eye when it suited you. So maybe you should stop pretending that you're the only one willing to take a stand." The audience exploded. Cheers, boos, shouts. The sound was deafening, a chorus of divided loyalties echoing off the studio walls. Some stood on their feet, clapping and hollering in support of Clooney. Others shouted, "Sit down," and "Respect Whoopi." The audience coordinator frantically waved his arms, trying to calm them, but the energy had spiraled out of control. Sonny Hostin tried again to diffuse the fire. "George, Whoopi, please, this is not." Whoopi's hand shot up, silencing her. Her eyes never left Clooney. "You don't get to decide what truth looks like for me, George. You don't get to rewrite my story. You've lived in a bubble of privilege your entire life. Every mistake smoothed over, every headline polished. I've had to claw my way through this business, take every hit, survive every scandal, and I'm still here. Don't you dare tell me I haven't earned my place." George's composure cracked, his voice rising for the first time. "And don't you dare tell me I've had it easy. I've fought my own battles. I've stood in rooms with the most powerful people in the world and called them out to their faces. I've taken risks that could have destroyed me, my career, my family. You think because I wear a suit and smile for the cameras that I don't bleed? That I don't fight? That I don't suffer the consequences?" The tension thickened like smoke. Audience members were shouting over each other now, their voices mixing into a frenzied storm. A group in the back began chanting Whoopi's name, their voices booming, while another cluster near the front started clapping rhythmically in support of Clooney. The clash between Hollywood charm and television fire had ignited into a full-blown cultural eruption. Joy Behar slammed her palm on the table, her voice sharp and panicked. "All right, this is insane. We need to stop." But her words were swallowed by the noise. The cameras panned, capturing faces of disbelief, mouths open, hands clasped over hearts, people shaking their heads. The energy in the room had tipped into something unpredictable, dangerous even. Behind the cameras, the producers argued furiously, some shouting to cut to commercial, others insisting they stay live. "We're breaking the internet," one producer whispered, sweat dripping down his temple. "This is history." Back at the table, George leaned forward now, no longer holding back, his voice sharp and unrelenting. "You say you've earned your place, Whoopi. And maybe you have. But with that comes responsibility. You don't just get to call people out when it's convenient. You don't get to bend the rules depending on who's sitting in front of you. You've been here too long to keep playing both sides." Whoopi's hand trembled against the table, but it wasn't weakness. It was fury she could barely contain. Her words burst out like thunder. "You think you're the only one who tells the truth? You think because you've stood in some refugee camp, you've seen it all? Try living your entire life under a microscope. Try being torn apart every time you open your mouth. You think the world forgives me the way it forgives you? Hell no. I carry the scars, George. Every damn day." The audience roared. Some clapped and cheered wildly, others booed. The split had become a living force, an energy that threatened to tear the studio in half. George's voice cut through it, commanding attention. "And yet you're still here, Whoopi. You're still standing. That's your power. But don't confuse survival with sainthood. Don't confuse being loud with being right." Whoopi shot back instantly, her voice booming, her body leaning so close to George it felt like she might reach across the table. "And don't confuse privilege with courage. Don't confuse charity with sacrifice. You've lived a life where the world has adored you no matter what you did. I've had to fight for every ounce of respect I've ever gotten." The crowd reached a fever pitch. People in the audience were standing, shouting, clapping, booing. The camera cut to a woman covering her face in shock, a man pointing furiously at George, another shaking his head in disbelief. At that moment, Ana Navarro finally broke her silence, her voice desperate. "Can we please stop this before it gets any worse? This is The View, not a boxing ring." But the irony was clear. It was too late. The View was a boxing ring now. And the fight wasn't over. George slammed his palm on the table, his voice rising with a conviction that made the studio tremble. "I'm not afraid to say what everyone else is thinking. You've built a platform, Whoopi, but somewhere along the way, you forgot what it was for. You became the very thing you used to stand against. And maybe that's why people are losing faith, not just in Hollywood, not just in television, but in the voices they used to trust." Whoopi's eyes blazed, her body trembling with fury. She leaned so close to George their faces were only inches apart. Her voice dropped to a growl, low and menacing, but filled with fire. "Say that again, George. Say it to my face one more time. I dare you." The studio went silent. The audience, the co-hosts, even the crew, every single soul froze. It was no longer entertainment. It was raw, unfiltered, dangerous truth. George stared back, his voice steady, unyielding. "You've lost your way, Whoopi. And the world sees it." The silence was shattered by an eruption. Cheers, boos, gasps, all colliding into a deafening roar. The room felt like it was vibrating, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone inside. The clash between Clooney and Goldberg had gone beyond words. It had become a battle for legitimacy, for respect, for truth itself. And as the cameras captured every second, the question hung in the air like a storm cloud waiting to break. Who would the world believe? The studio was on fire. Not literally, but in spirit, the tension, the voices, the energy, it all burned through the room like an inferno. The audience had abandoned any sense of polite TV decorum. People were shouting at the stage, standing up, some booing, others clapping wildly as if they were rooting for their favorite fighter in an arena. Security guards at the back exchanged nervous glances. The producers in the control booth screamed at each other, debating whether to cut to commercial, but no one dared to pull the plug. This was history in the making. George Clooney and Whoopi Goldberg sat locked in a duel of wills, their eyes locked, their breathing heavy. The table between them nothing more than a fragile barrier that kept this from boiling into something physical. Whoopi broke the silence first, her voice trembling with fury but also with hurt, the raw emotion leaking through. "You think you've just told some big truth here today, George? No. All you've done is show the world how arrogant you are. You come in here, you sit at this table, and you think you can lecture me about losing my way? Do you have any idea how insulting that is?" George's voice was firm, but there was a crack in it now, a flash of emotion. "I didn't come here to insult you, Whoopi. I came here to have an honest conversation. But you don't get to hide behind your legacy forever. If you can call out others, then someone has to be able to call out you. And today that someone is me. The audience let out a collective gasp. Some cheered him, others shouted, boo. The sound was chaos. Pure chaos. Joy Behar, frazzled and desperate, looked into the cameras and muttered, "We're gonna get cancelled for this." Ana Navarro rubbed her temples, visibly exhausted. Sunny Hostin whispered something under her breath, her eyes wide with disbelief. But Whoopi leaned forward, both palms flat against the table, her body trembling with fury. "You don't know what it's like to sit in this chair, George. Day after day. Every word I say gets dissected, every opinion torn apart. I've taken more bullets in this seat than you could even imagine. And I've still kept going. That's not losing my way. That's surviving in a world that wants nothing more than to silence me." George's jaw tightened. His words were soft now, almost sorrowful, but they carried weight. "Then maybe you've mistaken survival for purpose. Maybe surviving isn't enough anymore." The audience shrieked with noise. Some clapped furiously, others booed and hissed, some shouted Whoopi's name to drown out George's words. A few stood up and yelled, "Shame." Security began motioning for them to sit back down. Whoopi stared at George, her face etched with disbelief, her voice breaking. "You think you get to define my purpose? You're nothing but another man with too much power and not enough humility." George shook his head slowly. "No, Whoopi. I'm a man who's tired of pretending that people we admire are beyond reproach. And I think the world is tired of it too." That was it. The breaking point. Whoopi's hand slammed the table with a crack so loud it startled the co-hosts and made the audience scream. Her voice boomed, filled with rage. "You don't come into my house and tell me I've lost my way. Not here. Not today. Not ever." The audience erupted, half standing and cheering, half shouting and booing. It was chaos. The cameras zoomed in close on Whoopi's face, her eyes blazing, her jaw set in defiance. George, unmoved, sat tall, his eyes locked on her, refusing to yield. And then, finally, the director cut to commercial. The screen went black. But the damage was already done. Within minutes, clips from the confrontation hit social media. The hashtags exploded. Hashtag Clooney versus Whoopi. Hashtag The View Meltdown. Hashtag Clooney Truth Bomb. Hashtag Whoopi Fights Back. Millions of views flooded in before the show even ended. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. Every platform became a battlefield, a war zone of opinions. Some praised George Clooney for having the courage to speak truth to power, calling his words a rare moment of honesty in a world of polished PR. Others ripped him apart, calling him arrogant, disrespectful, and out of line for attacking Whoopi on her own stage. Clips of Whoopi slamming the table went viral instantly, memes sprouting like wildfire. Her defenders claimed she was standing up for herself, for women, for survivors of an industry that had chewed up and spat out so many. Her critics accused her of silencing dissent, of being unable to take what she so often dished out. News outlets picked it up within the hour. Headlines screamed across the internet. Clooney and Goldberg explode live on The View. Daytime TV chaos. George Clooney calls out Whoopi. Whoopi Goldberg slams Clooney in explosive showdown. Late-night comedians prepared their monologues. Political commentators dissected the moment as though it were a debate stage. Ordinary people across the country sat in their living rooms, replaying the clips, arguing with their families, their friends, their co-workers. Everyone had an opinion, and everyone wanted to be heard. But perhaps the most telling reaction came from the audience members who had been in that studio. As they filed out afterward, their faces were pale, their voices hushed. Some spoke of it like they had witnessed an accident, a collision they couldn't unsee. Others were exhilarated, saying they had just seen the most unforgettable moment in television history. One woman whispered into her phone as she walked out, "It felt like the world stopped spinning in there." Back in the studio, Whoopi sat silently during the commercial break, her chest rising and falling with heavy breaths, her hands still trembling from the force with which she had slammed the table. George sat back in his chair, his face unreadable, his hands clasped tightly together. The co-hosts avoided eye contact, the silence between them louder than words. The producers whispered furiously in the control room, debating damage control, statements, press releases. But they all knew it didn't matter. The footage was already out there. The world had already seen it. When the show returned from commercial, the tone was subdued, forced. The conversation shifted back to George's movie, but the air was heavy, poisoned. The audience no longer clapped freely. Every laugh felt hollow. The clash had taken over, overshadowed everything. And when the cameras finally cut for the last time that day, The confrontation still hung in the air, unresolved, unforgettable. The aftermath stretched beyond that studio, beyond the headlines, beyond the internet storm. It became a question that lingered in living rooms across America. Was Clooney right? Was Whoopi justified? Who was the hypocrite, and who was the hero? The truth depended on who you asked. And now it's your turn. Was George Clooney right to call out Whoopi Goldberg on her own stage? Or was Whoopi justified in fighting back with everything she had? Whose side are you on in this clash of titans? Tell us in the comments below. Your opinion matters. And if you want more explosive, dramatic stories just like this one, make sure you're subscribed to Prime Narrator. Hit that like button and turn on notifications. Because trust me, this is only the beginning.